All right, this is the other one. This is the trench. And you'll notice the stone, which was really neat, because that's what you want to see when you're excavating near a proposed stone mound. The problem, though, is that there was quite a bit of historic material up here. Right under the stone was prehistoric. It was almost all prehistoric. And so the thinking was, well, maybe it is a displaced stone. Maybe it is, in fact, something displaced from that stone mound. And that is a possibility. But that's the trench. It's actually really quite small, and it too went to about the same depth, about 100. This one about 118 centimeters below the surface. So when we came upon a concentration within the trench, we decided to expand it out a little bit more. And you can see this nice intrusive historic posts, the pesky historic things all over the place. You just kind of have to work around it. Yeah. So this is it. This is level 2. We start seeing ceramics poking out up here. This is the base of level 3. Here are those ceramics. So we have a nice concentration, and at about that level, we're seeing nothing but prehistoric material, which is great. So what that says is, at this trench, we can see a really good buried A horizon, right? We have a really good buried surface. So you have the historic fill on top from all of the construction, and then underneath that, we have the surface as it was meant to be, if you will. And whammy, we are not in Kansas anymore, right? The ceramics are very different in this area. So you can see the difference here in thickness. This is an example from that earlier area. This is an example of what we've got going on in this trench right here. Really thin, paper thin compared to. But the temper is the same. It remains grit. So that kind of thing stays the same. But we've got these nice notches going on up here. We've got nice notched rims here and here. So there's a different tradition happening here. What is it, like 150 feet away? So interesting. But it was easy to place, right? So if you see a lot, you're like, ah. So these here are examples from the low mound, which is Allison Lamott. So it's a different tradition we're thinking about, but it matched up nice and well. Here's examples of what those vessel shapes may have looked like from those rims. Nice and thin. Those are cord marking, and if you look really close, you can see that the curve on the cordage. So it's really neat. Nice, deep impressions on that cordage, and that is a nifty Allison Lamott. This is dead on, right? This is a Cadillac. You know what you've got when you see it, right? The early stuff is hard, but okay. So, and what we also have here in association, instead of that earlier Havana, we have an association with Man. Now, Man site is a very large Hopewell site, about 100 to about 500 AD near Mount Vernon. And one of the things that Man site has is a ceramic tradition that incorporates complicated stamping, where you take a wooden paddle and you impress a design on the surface of the pot. And Man folks were doing this on grog-tempered material, grog-tempered paste. So you know a Man site vessel when you have this stamping and you also have a grog temper. So everything else is grit. Now we get this grog, and we've got this complicated stamp. It screams of Man site. These sherds here, they're all about the same width, and they all came from just about the same area. So I'm thinking they're actually a trade vessel, probably one single trade vessel. So, but it is a very interesting connection. We have other Havana here. This is cross-hatching. This is another one with some zoning, some later Havana stuff. So, next. So we're in a different time zone here, right? So we just entered the Allison Lamott and Man area. So we've gone from 300 BC, and now we're into the 100 to 500 AD area. Now, Allison Lamott really predominates in through here, Terre Haute, Vincennes. It extends pretty far, the Umbras River here. Umbra, my French is horrible. River valleys here. And so it's a little bit north, but that's okay. We have a very prominent Allison Lamott occupation going on. Very interesting. All right. And the lithics with it are similar. We've got this nice prismatic blade, and we have other prismatic blades as an example, but the points are different. And this is where it gets kind of cool. So in and nearby, we have a low point and a copina, and those are often associated with man site and Allison Lamont. The connections there are strange, but you find low points and Copina points heavily with man site artifacts. So we have, probably upwards of about 4,000 of them from the man site. This is like a very important point type for man-faced stuff. So the influence is really neat. There's a bunch from Allison Lamont. So now the bigger, sorry. So, but also found here was a motley point, and this isn't what you want to see, but it's a good indication of what an intrusive feature can do for you. If you remember the historic post, down into that historic post is a motley point. Motleys are actually earlier, slightly earlier than the Snyder's point, so it is out of place. It's earlier than Snyder's. It would belong more with the other unit than it does here, but it's interesting that it was pushed down with the historic post. Just a question of what can happen when during building. So what do I know more about the mounds? Well, I started saying everybody thinks it's middle woodland now, but now it's just even more. So I've increased the range, right? So I was talking about 200 BC, 200 AD. I'm way into the 800 AD phase. So I think I made it worse. But who built the mound complex? Which one? Both Havana, or all Havana, Crab Orchard, Allison Lamont, certainly Man, all were part of mound building traditions. So all of them had a stake in that. So which one of them was it? Well, that's a great question. And hopefully we might be able to find out not only who was responsible for it, but what it meant to them, what this landscape meant to them, and why they did it. Now, an interesting thing is that everything that Lesueur talks about makes sense. Not everything is a burial mound. Allison Lamont, in particular, has a long tradition of having conical mounds with nothing in them, bare. And what you see from Lesueur in his notes is, and knowing the kind of documentarian he was, I mean, if you've looked at his sketches of fish, you know this guy doesn't let too much get by him. So he doesn't really talk a lot about the artifacts recovered. And that might be that he took them out and sent them back to France, sure. They might not have been there. And that's actually a very real possibility. Not all of the mounds are loaded with burials and elaborate grave goods and things like that. Not by a long shot, especially sometimes this earlier stuff. So I just talked about the possibility of Allison Lamont having empty mounds, but the earlier ones too, Crab Orchard, Havana, don't have a lot of stuff going on within their mounds either. So, yay! But I think one thing I've at least been able to do is put a name on it. So, and that's the first rule of success, is if you can name something and start really thinking about it analytically, you can maybe go somewhere. The hope is that we'll be able to expand these excavations and learn a little bit more about it. This bit about the possibility of ceramic stuff at 600 BC, and then we have 300 BC, and then we have 150 BC with the Havana stuff. And then we jump to 1 to 500 AD, and then we've got 500 to 800 AD. This is really important sequence for archaeology, and you rarely get to see that in the archaeological record, this stratigraphy of one after the other. That makes this site really pretty important for archaeologists. So when I take this back and look at from a management perspective, and when we have to build like an HVAC system, or when we have to put in something, it makes me really realize that we need to know as much about this site as we can. This early stuff is really, really elusive. We don't know much about it, and we're sitting on this nice site. There's great potential, I think, still for intact deposits. So we got a lot of work going. It's amazing to think, amidst all the historical buildings, that this stuff can exist in situ, but it does. So there's a chance I may have a better answer for you at some point. Oh, one more slide. Keep going. So thank you very much, Historic New Harmony and Science on the Edge.